All right, welcome to America This Week, Monday live. I'm Matt Taibbi.
And I'm Walter Kern.
Walter, what's going on? You got a very pleasing background there.
That's my room here in Las Vegas headquarters, or my Las Vegas office. It's got absolutely nothing in it. There is a salt lamp, if you know what those new age items are, but it's not turned on, so it's not radiating the proper amount of, I don't know, salt electrons or whatever it's supposed to do. But I didn't have time to turn it on before the show.
Oh, well, that's okay. Yeah. All right.
I feel the
vibes anyway.
It's that thing right in back of me. See that little pink thing?
I like it.
Hipsters in our audience will know, Matt. People who get massages and hang out with ayahuasca friends and so on will know what it is.
Is it supposed to exude some kind of uplifting, improving vibe or something like that? Or is it just supposed to be...
That's absolutely what it's supposed to do. It's
Gotcha.
it's a kind of aromatherapy with minerals, and it's supposed to calm me down, keep me from interrupting and being quite so manic. But since it's not turned on, I can't guarantee it will have those results.
No, that's okay. I wouldn't worry about it.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, as usual, we're in the middle of some shit in America. Walter, I increasingly don't watch the news over the weekend because I find that I'm a happier person when I don't do that. And
you switch to the sports track. And the sports track is the news, Matt. In some ways, encoded in sports are all the same issues, all the same conflicts, but in a way that is much more palatable to the human psyche. So I've thought about doing that. I just don't care enough because all the people I cared about in sports back as a kid don't have equivalents now, I guess.
No, it's not as heated.
I like Lenny Dykstra. I like athletes who smoked and were fat. Those, especially the baseball players.
Not too many of those left, sadly. No, not many John Cruxters left.
Harmon Killebrew.
Yeah, so if you don't pay attention for a couple of days, stuff can happen this weekend. And look, Los Angeles is a mess right now, and whether or not you think this is a reprisal of 2020. Or a preview of a reprisal of 2020 with the George Floyd unrest, or whether it's just an episode that's going to calm down.
Or if you realize in retrospect that George Floyd wasn't, how can I put it? Before this happened, for the last 3 weeks, I've been getting specific intelligence about when they were going to start this stuff.
Really?
The people that would be involved were named, the Service Workers Employees International Union.
Oh, well, yes. Yeah, we're going to get into that.
Whose leaders now in jail. The locations were slightly speculative, but Los Angeles was included in the short list. None of this is surprising. I mean, dude, it's no more surprising than when they start baseball season. It literally starts within a week or so of the George Floyd summer. Kickoff is early June, depending on the weather. So the idea that came out of nowhere is ridiculous for anybody who pays attention.
So just to pull back for a second, later on in the show, we're going to be talking about 1984. And ironically, one of the key themes of the book is this idea of constantly elevating what they call the enthusiasms of the population by making sure that people have no inner life and are constantly focused on negative emotions, hate, anger, rage, and it can be moved from one place to another effortlessly. We've been in that place in a lot of ways, and sometimes I wonder whether in the United States, the reason we don't see it as clearly as you do in the book 1984 is because it's kind of split into two different categories, right? They market one side of it, one type of anger response to one demographic and one to another, but always there's this undercurrent of dividing and organizing, and this is like a classic example.
Well, in 1984, there's no doubt but that there's a controlling authority because it's a one-party state. In the United States, because we're allegedly a two-party state, each party accuses the other of sort of launching something, but we can't imagine that there is an establishment beneath the waves,
right.
that is putting out a calendar for everybody. In 1984, they have Hate Week. I'm at a part of the book where they're all getting ready for Hate Week, and it's a codified, calendrically regular occasion, like Memorial Day or Holy Week. Basically.
Right, or Eid or something like that. Yeah,
we have it here, but we pretend it's just a coincidence that in the first week of June every few years, in sensitive times of political power machinations, suddenly riots break out. When dude, for how long did that not happen? I mean, it did not happen for a long time.
I mean, we've been kind of perennially in Hate Week for 9 years now, and it's just a question of where the focus is. Are we focused on foreign wars or domestic unrest or whatever it is? So just to back up, let's just get the factual stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
This all began with ICE raids in California, which in turn triggered protest, anti-ICE protests, which in turn triggered the deployment of the National Guard, over which there have since been protests as well. And so let's just look at SOT 1. Here's some video of some of the protests. So blocked highways are a big feature of this thing.
This is not just a good gesture. This is something we need to make real. We need to bring down this empire once and for all. All right. Burn it down! Burn it down! Burn it down!
A lot of burning cars.
Waymos.
Cars that burned so long that there was nothing left.
Have been shut down by law enforcement, and it is now being shut down by the other side. Demonstrators are on the surface of the southbound 101 freeway and blocking traffic.
Live at some of these Waymos that are on fire at the moment. And as Kyung noted, this has taken a turn since she's been out there over the last several hours, when she saw a different type of protester that was there in a more peaceful way. A lot of people, things have turned far more destructive and violent.
Okay, I guess we're going to have to return to this theme in a little bit, but
Can they stop using the word peaceful?
Yeah.
I mean, not that they're using it incorrectly, but it's just not a word to be used anymore around this topic. It's like they should have a meter, peaceful to violent, and then it should, like one of those big thermometers that goes up and down in the desert when you drive between Vegas and LA. How peaceful is it? And at what point does peaceful become, rowdy? And what point does rowdy become violent?
And again, we're going to talk about this later, because the overlap with 1984 and Hate Week is it's uncanny, because one of the features of this critical chapter in the book that we're going to talk about today is this moment where media lies are suddenly out in the open,
right?
They're uncorrected, and so for me, one of the key moments in the last 8 or 9 years for me was when I made some kind of offhand comment in a column about the absurdity of it. Was a headline that said something like, 26 injured in mostly peaceful protests or something like that, right? And it was a British paper. It may have been The Guardian. I can't remember which one. And a whole bunch of other journalists jumped on me, and they were trying to prove statistically that most people hadn't participated in anything violent. And my point was, you can't put the injury and the piece in the same headline and have it not be confusing. But
most people in the town around Auschwitz didn't work at Auschwitz. I mean, what?
Well,
I mean, most people, you see, this attempt to use the word peaceful over images of fire is some kind of horrible mind control experiment, where I'm looking at fire, but I'm hearing peaceful. I'm seeing casualty lists, but I'm hearing peaceful. No, we can decide for ourselves whether burning cars represent this adjective or that adjective. Just tell us what's happening.
Yeah, again, this is very part and parcel with the whole moral clarity journalism era, when it's very, very important that we not get the wrong impression by factual statements, right? So
because people suddenly got stupider, and we need to guide them, whereas in the past they were able to tell that like casualty lists and burning cars equal something not good. Double plus on good.
Yeah, double plus on good. So speaking of which, LA Mayor Karen Bass, who I can't figure, she's a very strange character to me. Either she's sort of a uniquely media untrained politician, or she has moments of I don't give a fuck, which is interesting. But she's been pilloried.
Dude, if a huge part of my city burned down while I was, at a conference elsewhere and didn't come home right away and had no fire engines there in place and so on, and I was still mayor, I too would start to get a little uppity. I would feel bulletproof. When bullets bounce off you of that size, like artillery shells, it's rational to feel immune.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite so far media appearance of hers is the one where she's being asked kind of in a hectoring way, like, don't you have anything to say to the citizens? And she just kind of stared downward at a 45-degree angle, like, I'm not answering your question. And it was a very strange piece of video. Anyway, she's gotten a lot of guff over the last 2 or 3 days, some of it undeserved, I think, but in the spirit of being fair, we're going to roll a soundbite that is not like picking and choosing the context. We're going to give you like a whole stretch of her answering press questions.
I want the people of Los Angeles to know that we stand with all Angelenos, no matter where you were born. The First Amendment right gives you the ability, again, to protest peacefully, but it does not give you the right to be violent, to create chaos, or to vandalize property, and that will not be tolerated.
How do you think that vandalism impacts the overall message of the protest?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think protests need to be peaceful, period. And anytime it deteriorates into violence, that is a problem, and it absolutely messes with the overall message. No, my disappointment is I've been talking to the federal government for days. I was hoping to prevent this situation from happening. I was trying to encourage the administration that if they deployed the National Guard in Los Angeles, it would create a sense of chaos. It's the last thing our city needs. Our city is still trying to recover from the wildfires. And you just think about how so many people were impacted by that. And that's an example of where the administration was helpful. And to go from that situation to where we are now is just really tragic. And I think it's so unfortunate. It's the last thing Los Angeles needs.
Yeah. Oh my God, the chutzpah to take one fucking disaster that you either created or at least botched and use it as the excuse for someone not to try to rein in the next one is upside down world.
It's impressive. I mean, and she invoked the whole peaceful thing there. Not as dramatically as some other politicians, but it was still.
What's the timeline too here? I mean, the National Guard has come in to guard federal buildings. It is not there for riot control, and it's not being used for that purpose yet. How in the world, it's like when your parents come and catch you fighting and you say, if you just stay out of the house, it wouldn't get so bad in here.
Yeah. I mean, look, yes, the National Guard is deployed to protect federal buildings, but they're deployed the fact that they're deployed at all, it is a significant move. Like, it hasn't
300
been done in a while.
Matt, I completely disagree with you.
Really? Okay.
Calling out the National Guard is almost a figure of speech at this point in American life. It's the first thing that comes to the lips of every normie when they see property damage and rioting. They should call out the National Guard. It's done all the time. It's been done before in these situations. It was done in Los Angeles, obviously, in its last big season of riots. And at what point is it legitimate?
Well,
once the city's on fire, or is it legitimate as a preventative, prophylactic measure?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And listening to some of these politicians like apologizing for the presence of law enforcement while people who are waving Mexican flags and burning cars and stuff like that. If I were paying taxes to the American government, and the American government was sitting idly by and sort of cheering the property destruction process, like I would be miffed. I would.
Matt, do you? I mean, we're suffering from 1984-ish amnesia here. Okay, in the first months of the Biden administration, the National Guard had the damn Capitol locked down. It had the entire city of Washington, D.C. behind fucking chain link fence.
I know it was like Washington, D.C. was like a parody of the free speech zones at political conventions. You know how you can't get within 1 million yards of any building during a political convention because you can only go to certain places to express yourself unless you have 9 different badges and stuff like that. But when you make a whole city like that, that's what happened in DC after J6. All right, just quickly, let's just go.
The fact is, if you call out the National Guard too early, you're called provocative. If you call them out too late, you're called weak.
Right. So normally, National Guard is a governor thing, and in this case, Governor Gavin Newsom did not invoke the National Guard. This was, or ask for it. So he gave an interview to MSNBC, and it was a little WWE-ish, sort of doing a Rowdy Piper speech directed at Tom Homan. Kind of interesting. Let's take a look at that.
Tom Homan, the border czar, said to me yesterday he did not rule out literally arresting you, nor Mayor Bass, if you interfere in his work. He said you hadn't yet.
He's a tough guy. Why doesn't he do that? He knows where to find me. But you know what? Woo-hoo. Let your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated. Let your hands off these poor people who are just trying to live their lives, man. Trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years. The fear, the horror, the hell is this guy? Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with. Tough guy. I don't give a damn. But I care about my community. I care about this community. The hell are they doing? These guys need to grow up. They need to stop. And we need to push back. And I'm sorry to be so clear, but that kind of bloviating is exhausting. So, Tom, arrest me. Let's go.
Oh, God. I've been on TV with that guy. I've sat right next to him. He's a terrible actor, and he's getting worse.
Like everybody else in California, they all actually want to be actors. And it's funny. It's funny when an actual actor becomes a politician, because it's such a clear step down, like with Schwarzenegger's case. But he mentioned something interesting there, and I want to bring this up because this is something that drives me absolutely batty about the reporting about this whole thing. Get your hands off the poor little girls who want to go to school and the families who pay their taxes. Now, this dovetails with something that Karen Bass said, that there's a policy now of breaking up families and taking away immigrants and who are never going to be able to be in contact with the people they leave behind, like their wives and kids who stay in country. They deport the others, and they're separated forever. And she called that a marked departure in policy. Can we hear that? Here we go.
Detainees have not been allowed to speak to legal counsel. That is a marked departure from what has happened in the past. When you think of a mother that might be working in a household, taking care of children on another side of town, that impacts that family as well as her family. And so this is something that I think should not be happening in our city. And I join with the governor in appealing to the administration to rescind the order to federalize the National Guard and allow the National Guard to come back under the control of the governor. So with that, we can open.
This is just a little point for me, but Walter, you know me, I never plug my books on this show. But if anybody wants to go pick up, I could, yes, but I don't. But if you want to go look at a book I wrote called The Divide in the early 2010s, which was about criminal justice inequities in the United States. One of the things I did in that book, there's a whole chapter about this, is I spent a considerable amount of time in Boyle Heights in LA interviewing immigrant families who had been broken up as a result of federal immigration dragnets. And the story was exactly the same kind of stuff that's going on now. Like they would grab, the father in a family who got in a fist fight in a bar, and he would just disappear and they never have any contact with them again. Incredibly common story. There's no change. This stuff has been going on forever. And now what's happening is we're seeing ancient federal immigration policy being presented to the public as something new and disturbing. Now, you may still think it is new and disturbing, but it's the newness that bothers me. It's the idea that this has not been going on. That's frustrating.
A few weeks ago, we talked about, how deportation and works and how immigration law is enforced. And I gave some stories from my own background. I married an immigrant a few years ago, not my current wife. It's not pretty. It's not what you would call, fair in a usual constitutional sense, because it does involve kind of, how can I put it, extraordinary measures, a curtailed sense of due process, and all sorts of rights on the part of law enforcement that aren't usually exercised, or prerogatives, let's say, in domestic law enforcement, or in law enforcement that doesn't involve the border or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I interviewed a guy who was actually from South America and was mistakenly tossed over the border to Mexico, straight into the hands of a cartel that kidnapped him and contacted his family back in the States for ransom. I mean, the horror stories, even back then, were just endless. It's just frustrating to see this all being presented as something new.
Well, Matt, but let's take that one step further. If it's not new, then why is it becoming the stuff of riots?
Well, okay. So now we get into the question of, well, what is this all about, really, right? And I have a theory that this and also the 2020 episode, not so much. I mean, there were obviously organic protests in 2020, but my immediate instinct when stories like this happen is to go look and see what Norm Eisen is tweeting, right? For those who don't know, this is a Brookings Institute fellow who has been a foreign policy bigwig for ages and is famous for authoring essentially the playbook for color revolutions. And part of the formula for how you overturn an unfriendly foreign government that you don't like is you drum up a significant amount of negative press via press organs that you funded, maybe by NED or the USAID or whatever it is, and then you use what they call what's the term again? It's something like non-institutional vectors or something like that, which is street protests to apply pressure, and then you have calls for somebody to step down on top of that. So they're very used to this idea of heavy press, heavy messaging, and then people on the streets to apply pressure and create unrest. And that's we've done that overseas a lot, and I do wonder if we're in an age where this is what's going on in America a little bit, because these guys they seem very in their element at these moments. So
in every society, there are legitimate grievances on the part of individuals, groups, classes, and so on. How they are adjudicated and processed is the question. When they become the stuff of what we might call leveraged disturbances, you've entered a slightly different situation. I think the thing that makes this immigration rioting sort of singular are the following factors. Number one, it seems to be overlaid on what I think we can all agree is a gang structure in America around drug importation, drug smuggling, and gang activity. Okay. In other words, there is a sense, probably rightly, that immersed in this population are a certain number of people who are, bringing fentanyl into America, trafficking people, and so on. So there's a feeling that there is a criminal element that has an agenda somewhat aligned here. And a lot of the rhetoric around deportation has to do with getting rid of the worst, the criminals, and so on. Number two, it seems to be a kind of pan-leftist sort of protest when Palestinian flags are waved at the same time as Mexican flags. It's always true that there's intersectionality among rebels, but there is also a feeling, and you see it on the news, whether it's real or there are provocateurs involved, that this is a bunch of groups using an opportunity to show force. Also, my sources, and these are not political sources, but sort of military and law enforcement sources, are incredibly impressed by the behavior of the rioters. In other words, they seem to be able to gain and hold ground. Their tactics are rather sophisticated to the professional eye, and that's what they're seeing. I mean, these aren't people who are These aren't
I
people.
feel like, Walter, if you and I went out and protested, we would end up getting our asses kicked and getting arrested like within 10 seconds. Like if we tried to set a car on fire, right?
Well,
they're pretty good at it, I would say. I'm impressed.
But yesterday you had police pinned down under a bridge with cinder blocks raining down. You've had charges beaten back. You've had various maneuvers that seem practiced and rather expert, given that people are unarmed and have only, stones and improvised explosive devices like fireworks and so on. And when the practiced eye looks at this and says, wow, I see organization here. I don't see a bunch of people who don't want to be deported saying, don't deport me.
Yeah. So let's just quickly look and see what they're saying. So here's Norm Eisen's tweet. And this is the head of the Democracy Defenders Fund. And he's also kind of the head of a lot of the legal efforts to oppose various initiatives. You can imagine that basically any one of these kind of lawfare-ish groups, like they've all got some kind of connection to Norm Eisen. He was in the Transition Integrity Project episode, which also involved questions about how quickly can we turn people out in the streets and stuff like that. So he writes, President Trump is unlawfully deploying military units to respond to civilian protests. He is relying on a statute that's never been used for this purpose before in our nation's history. I thought that was a weird sentence, Walter, didn't you? Like he's unlawfully using a law, right? Isn't that what he's saying?
Unlawfully deploying military units to respond to civilian protests? I was around in the Vietnam era. What? I mean, they were using the National Guard every other day for civilian protests. What's he talking about?
I don't know. And remember, these are the same folks who wanted to use the Insurrection Act to keep certain people, like multiple people, off the ballot. So,
what wasn't January 6th a civilian protest?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever it was a civilian protest. Well, they after that, as I say, they locked down the entire Capitol with National Guard from many states. I know it's a federal district. I understand it as special laws. When I was there for the inauguration, the streets had Humvees and armored personnel carriers in them. It was a military zone for a couple of days during that period. But all I'm saying is, to be shocked by the National Guard's use to control civil disturbances seems extraordinary to me.
President Trump has no authority to unleash military forces on civilian protesters.
Has he done that?
I don't think he has, but I think he also does have that authority. If it's come up quite a number of times in the past. But anyway, so he says that. Let's hear what Trump says about this.
And don't just call him Norm Eisen. Call him Ambassador Norm Eisen, retired, as he calls himself.
Ambassador emeritus, right?
The concern for civil liberties that suddenly comes up when it's your side after, COVID, for example, when, everybody had to stay in their damn houses,
Yes, we're launching the Shut the Fuck Up the committee,
right?
And you'll be getting your instructions presently. But now we're civil libertarians. So let's hear what Trump says.
People that are causing the problem are professional agitators. They're insurrectionists. They're bad people. They could be in jail. Thank you.
All right. Is he being ironic about the insurrectionist thing, do you think? I mean, I guess he's not, right? Because that's part of, and this is what's so frustrating about this era. Like, you use that language, why? So that you can justify use of the Insurrection Act, right? And is it an insurrection? I don't think this is yet. I mean, like you would have to prove that there was some kind of organized operation to destabilize the entire government here, and not just. Mm-hmm.
Well, let's remember the incident and that started this, that triggered this, and there was another incident a few days before in Bloomington, Minnesota. Don't forget, they were similar. Basically, they were attempts to stop ICE from arresting people or holding people. They were attacks in Los Angeles, or at least, aggressive protests around detention centers, right? Federal facilities.
Yeah.
So if you're going to make a federal facility by the process of, metonymy, an arm of the federal government, and they're going after an agency of the law enforcement agency of the federal government, I suppose if you want to be politically intense about it, you might call it an insurrection if you're Donald Trump.
Yeah. I don't love that. I mean, I didn't love it when they called the people after J6 insurrectionists. I mean, I remember noticing the language and noticing how abruptly everybody you know how when like there's a fashion wave at school and suddenly everybody's wearing the same thing, like in high school. That's what happened when Mark Elias and some other people used the word insurrection or insurrectionist after J6. Suddenly every headline or it was somewhere in the text of every news story about J6, like instantaneously, right? And
we're also seeing the injection of the word chaos in a way that, I think should be counted up by Orff and maybe used in a video collage, because they at every opportunity they use that word.
You know what? That's an interesting point, because I'm not sure what are they getting at, do you think?
They're getting at the fact that when Trump is in office, things are all volatile and crazy, and you just don't want it. It's like bad weather. And then when a Democrat's in office, it all calms down. It's a form of sort of hypnotic suggestion. Trump equals chaos, but it also is a kind of veiled message that if you want things to be peaceful, get rid of this guy.
Yeah, we should almost have a Pee-wee's word of the day, media word of the day, right? The word of the day is insurrection. Yay! But no, it's that blunt and that ridiculous and that obvious. Okay, so back in 2020, we had these infamous screenshots and headlines of mostly peaceful protests. Probably the funniest one was the CNN reporter, I forget who it was, who's standing in front of some conflagration, like, big as the Chrysler building, and there's a chyron that says that says mostly peaceful protest on it. And this became, kind of a cause célèbre on the right at the time, because to them it was it was emblematic of the way the media was acting in response to that story. At first I thought it was like an accidental excess by some of those outlets, but it was repeated so often that it was clear that they thought about it and did it.
The mostly peaceful phrase.
Yeah, the mostly peaceful thing.
You see, the press, especially the television press, cable news, is in a real bind when it comes to civil disorder. It needs to get the most violent and disturbing and arresting pictures it can. It has to compete for those. The nature of the medium is that if there's a fire and the camera's not on it, you're not doing your job.
Right.
Okay. At the same time, it has adopted, what you mentioned earlier, which is this kind of, politicized, moralized coverage.
Yeah, moral clarity. Yeah.
Yeah, principle in which its words should be ones that, are suitable, ideologically suitable or something, or it used to be that they just had to be fair or objective, but now they're supposed to somehow be right and good too. So you have to superimpose this kind of newspeak language, mostly peaceful, what does mostly peaceful even mean? I mean,
it's a nonsense term, I think, isn't it?
Well, if there's only one,
everything's mostly peaceful.
Okay, well, so last night on the Vegas Strip, this really happened. 2 YouTube influencers had a shootout in front of the Bellagio fountain, one of the most crowded, tourist-filled places of the Strip. But it was a mostly peaceful shootout because only 2 people died out of 2,000 who stand there and look at the fountain. It was overwhelmingly peaceful, except for the shooting. So I guess what I'm saying is, on the one hand, they're pulled by their need to have violent imagery. On the other hand, they want to have moral clarity and, a kind of peaceable, mature commentary, and they don't go together. And people are like, what do? I look at the fire, or do I listen to the words? Look at the fire or listen to the words?
Yeah, and this is, again, it's going to come into play when we talk about 1984 too, because the old school American media, which was crass, sensationalistic, profit hungry, and obvious, would just roll with the most sensationalist angle they could find. Violent shitstorm hits Los Angeles, right? And they would latch on to whatever the worst pictures were and just roll them over and over and over again. And there would the political commentary would, if they even had it in any kind of overt way, would be kind of buried, right? Like there was often this very excited, we have this great video, we have great art to show you. Art is the term to art, right? So even if it's something like, a baby down a well, or the Kursk, at the bottom of the ocean, or whatever it is, they just want to show you what we just want to show you what we have. Now there's an extra layer of calculation that's been added to how we do this stuff, which is, you're absolutely right. We find the worst stuff, but then we got to tell you how to interpret it on top of that, which is confusing as hell, right?
Catastrophes shown in the best light here at CNN. Have you ever been involved, as I have, with a story that also included the television press, and you're there as a member of, the literary press, and you see how differently it comes off?
Totally.
I mean, somebody's doing a stand-up at the one vantage point for a camera where things look weird, but in fact, nothing's going on.
Right. Or everybody there is an invited personage, right? So it's supposed to look like a protest, but there's actually only 19 people there, and they all, right? You've done these things where there's more media than there are protesters.
One thing I'm sure of about these Los Angeles riots is that if I were to go to Los Angeles, and I know a lot of people who live there, and I was in contact with them, steadily over the last couple of days, I would probably feel that they were much more isolated than I thought watching them on social media and the news. In other words, my feeling is that if you go to Los Angeles right now, you'll see in downtown and in certain areas of the city,
Well, the downtown has been placed on a kind of lockdown, though.
But let's be real a second, because one of my problems as a reporter and a commentator is I'm asked to forget a lot of things that we all know tactically in order to report on a situation. Downtown Los Angeles, big parts of it, are already horror zones, Dantean hellscapes. When Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass get up and talk about Angelenos and how they want to protect them all, I'm like, you know what? There are probably fewer crimes today in downtown LA, even during the riots, than there are on a supposedly good day. I mean, have you ever been to Skid Row in LA?
No, not recently. No,
dude, you can barely drive through the streets. You can barely drive through the streets. People are dying on the streets at scale in downtown Los Angeles. And when I watch city and state leaders talk about how they're out to guard 4-year-olds and so on, I go, you didn't care a week ago when people were ODing next to burning, mattresses in the middle of the damn street downtown. It's on the best day a horror show.
Yeah, and that's definitely not only LA, right? I mean,
if somebody said Skid Row in LA is eye-opening, I used to drive my kids there when we happened to be in LA together just to show them what was possible in America. The shame of America. The shame of America actually is not these riots. It's what it's like in the places they're rioting on a regular Wednesday. And I will stand by that. And anybody who's been there will tell you I'm right.
Yeah. Look, and that's the heart of this whole issue right now is it's a chicken egg question, right? Like, who's the provocateur here? Did this begin with a violent situation and a destabilized situation that needed to be stabilized, or is the response to the effort to bring in outside force, is that destabilizing? Is the like, what is it? There's some kind of like a no activity order, or
I'm sorry. I would love to be popular with a certain contingent of people. Somebody called me said I was riding cheetah dick earlier. It took me about 15 minutes to figure out what they were saying, that I was somehow,
cheetah. Oh,
I was
Cheeto.
No, I was riding cheetah. They spelled it cheetah. And
right.
So I've been reverse engineering this insult in my mind. And so I figured out what they said. As much as I don't like being accused of that, I'm not going to let that ding my sense of reality. I've been following this story. I have family members who live in LA and a lot of friends, and I've lived there myself. I've watched the order of things occur here. I know newspaper editors in LA, old-time newspaper editors who are very objective and live near downtown. The order here has been ICE moved in, it made some arrests. There was a very, aggressive protest. There was conflict. Things started up, and the incursion of the National Guard, which is not, as I say, involved in, nightstick riot policing, but is guarding federal facilities, was not, I'm afraid, the trigger. It just wasn't. And I mean, as much as we can run things backwards and forwards and mirror it and so on, the enforcement action, though it could be construed in the future as somehow making it more, volatile or intense, was not the triggering fact. It was the arrest of the migrants who were to be deported.
Yeah. So, I think that's right. And, but that's not how it's going to be portrayed. If you're watching MSNBC, the huge headline, and you're going to hear lots of politicians talking about this, about the potential imposition of martial law, right? That's what people are talking about. And the 2020 saw about mostly peaceful is fully out there now. So let's listen to Cory Booker talking about it on Meet the Press.
Reality is we see peaceful protests launching in Los Angeles. And again, any violence against police officers should not be accepted. Local authorities can handle that. But remember, a lot of these peaceful protests are being generated because the President of the United States is sowing chaos and confusion by arresting people who are showing up for their immigration hearings, who are trying to abide by the law. he's arresting them. And you see this in communities that are Republican, Trump supporters, being outraged that he's raiding kitchens and arresting people, high schools and arresting people who are not what he said he would do, which is focus law enforcement resources on violent criminals and people that are a danger to other Americans.
Okay, I don't think...
So he's cool with that? Is that the new policy? That anybody who's a criminal among immigrants?
Well, yes. I mean, that was the Obama administration policy.
But I mean, have Democrats fully signed on to that? Because they weren't so cool
not
with
recently,
that. Not cool with that either recently.
No, not recently. No. They changed their tone on that. But I think he's incorrect about that. I mean, without taking a position on the immigration thing, I think it's pretty clear that Trump, people who voted for Trump voted for this, right? And that's why
that's the other factor here. We just had an election that was, to a large part, about this very issue. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Remember that?
Yeah.
And despite the horrible, uncouth, and vulgar exaggerations that Trump was accused of, like they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, he was elected president. Now, that means that in some sense, America decided to get tough on immigration. And I guess they didn't decide what the exact tactics would be. But I have seen with my very eyes in the federal building in New York City, when I went there with my British bride to try to get legal status for her, people showing up for their hearings, getting arrested.
Yeah, they're making, again,
that was 1986.
Yeah, again, right? So they're presenting something that's not new as new. There's a lot of stuff that Cory Booker, with whom I've had conversations before, and I think isn't crazy compared to some other politicians, but he's just flat out not telling the truth in that soundbite. I don't think, about a bunch of things. Now let's look at Kamala Harris. Gave a very provocative tweet about all this. All right, can we blow that up a little bit? Los Angeles is my home. Like so many Americans, I am appalled at what we are witnessing on the streets of our city. Deploying the National Guard is a dangerous escalation meant to provoke chaos again, right, Walter? It's like,
there's your word.
The word, I can guarantee you, if I look on the DNC talkers list today, that the word chaos is going to be on there. In addition to the recent ICE raids in Southern California and across our nation, it is part of the Trump administration's cruel, calculated agenda to spread panic and division. This administration's actions are not about public safety. They're about stoking fear of a community demanding dignity and due process. Protest is a powerful tool, essential in the fight for justice. And as the LAPD, mayor, and governor have noted, demonstrations in defense of our immigrant neighbors have been overwhelmingly peaceful. I continue to support the millions of Americans who are standing up to protect our most fundamental rights and freedoms. Overwhelmingly peaceful is the new phrase. I have a feeling that's going to take the place of mostly peaceful, because that's,
like 5 out of 6 or something of the people in JFK's limo were not killed that day. Okay. Let's do a quick semiotic analysis of this dispatch from Kamala Harris. Can you show it, the top of it, please? Okay. It's from the office of Kamala Harris, but not Kamala Harris, Kamala D. Harris. Did you know that she was Kamala D. Harris? I didn't.
What does D stand for? Do we even know?
We don't want to speculate. But
I'm going to look while you speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. It's from the office of. It's bordered in a kind of way that official stationery, maybe like a president's, might be. So it's given all the kind of symbolic weight of semi-official statement. Now, what does she say here? She doesn't say that immigrants are protesting. She says, go down a little bit. She says, demonstration in defense of our immigrant neighbors. See, and there's something I find a little curious. How many of the people at these protests are people who fear deportation? Or, in other words, she's saying that this is about people acting in defense of others. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that they are creating a movement that doesn't have to do specifically with the people involved. It's as though others have to come to their defense. Coming to their defense, I guess, is the phrase that I find curious. Finally, if she is so absolutely devoted to this cause, why isn't she at the protests? If they're mostly peaceful, why aren't political leaders
overwhelmingly
there? But why aren't they there? If they support them, why are they hiding behind their stationery? Why aren't they standing in the peaceful crowds in defense of, their neighbors, making speeches? And yet they're not. I mean, in other words, it's not the March on Washington. Where's Martin Luther King? Where's Cesar Chavez? Where are the civil rights leaders? They're not there. If these are peaceful civil rights protests, then why aren't people like Kamala and others standing with microphones?
I don't know.
I don't either.
I mean, she's tweeting. This is really weird. I'm looking for. So yeah, why isn't she there is a good question. And what's with this Kamala D. Harris thing? Is that a rebrand?
Yeah.
It's a rebrand, right?
It doesn't stand for drunk. It doesn't stand for a lot of
Debbie.
things.
It stands for Debbie.
It stands for having a middle name and, therefore being, I don't know, one of the fancier people in the world. The office of, look at its symbol. It's very much like the eagle that the White House uses. I can't quite see what distinguishes it from. Not much.
Yeah, no, it looks just like the podium. And if you look on her about page, it's a picture of her. And then if you scroll down, there's a picture of her with Zelensky. Could our Mr. Producer check and see if there's a way back version of this page that doesn't have the D on it? I don't remember campaign ads for Kamala D. Harris last year. It's a pretty weird little side diversion. But
don't they say former Vice President Harris sometimes? Wouldn't that be the usual way to style yourself?
Yeah.
Does she not want to be associated with that anymore?
No, she still calls herself the former vice president. It says contact the former vice president on the front.
Right.
But
my simple question is that if you are going to style these as civil rights protests in the manner of Martin Luther King or Cesar Chavez or whoever it might be, then why aren't you there leading them, especially if they're peaceful?
Well, again, I just think it's so conspicuous that you have all these politicians who, I mean, they could take a position on the National Guard thing and also urge for calm and
right
and
exactly
not, right
exactly
and that's probably what we would have seen 20 or 30 years ago too.
Yes, in the normal years, that's exactly what you would have seen. You would have seen some admission that this isn't good, this isn't great, but this is worse.
Right. And there would have been, because we once had admittedly narrow, but there was like some small middle ground where the two sides would generally agree on certain things, like, you know, no absolute cancellation of the Bill of Rights, right? Like, you know, that kind of stuff. But now there's the political angle outweighs any of the patriotic considerations, and you know, you could argue that in both directions, but with this, they can't even bring themselves to you know, make a kind of a general call for, hey, everybody chill out, let's do it the right way, or let's do nonviolent protests. Because remember, nonviolent protest is out. Remember that guy David Shore, who got canceled because he retweeted it. All he did is retweet a study showing that violent protest was less efficacious than nonviolent protests. This was in 2020, and he got fired from this progressive think tank. I forget what it was called. So, you know, we're in this new place where it kind of, and you mentioned the kind of professional protest vibe. I'm sure you remember like the early 80s when, I'm sorry, the early 2000s when we were covering things like, I don't know, like I remember going to the Cindy Sheehan protests, and like the Free Mumia people were over here, right? And there were the environmentalists over here, and you know, the anti-pipeline folks were over there. And it's just it was just like a traveling caravan of stuff, and everybody, you know, it was frustrating to me because as an anti-war person, I thought, you know, if everybody could just sort of get under the same banner for a little bit, it would probably be more effective, and you might even persuade a few people. But now,
Matt, we don't have anti-war protests anymore.
Oh, I know.
Have you noticed? I mean, we've got we've got pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, whatever protests, but we don't have protests that relate to our wars. It's a strange thing, because I've lived through several periods of public outrage over real things. And I'm not saying this immigration controversy isn't real, but you know, as a young child, my life was dominated by the protests, riots, and so on in Minnesota over the Vietnam War, right, you know, into the 70s. Later, the Iraq War. Later, you know, whatever Occupy Wall Street was, which, you know, was triggered by a real financial crash, right? I mean, a real sort of robbery of the middle class and, you know, the working class of America at scale.
And by the way, that's another one that ties into 1984, but we'll get back to that.
And I've even participated in them. You know, I participated in the Standing Rock protest against a oil pipeline on Indian Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. I went and lived there in tents and served food and was part of the whole thing. I felt strongly about it. But I don't think there is any doubt in anyone's mind that there is a protest industrial complex at this point. To some degree, it's routinized, it's codified, and whether you believe it's insurrectional or organized and paid, or that they do it anyway, but of course they need a little help, I don't know. But anyone who's been on the ground knows there's an infrastructure for protest in America. There just is.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say about this, and I hate to harp on this, but that Democracy Playbook by Norm Eisen, the sort of the original one, I think, was from quite a while ago. It was like 2020 or 2021. They issued a new one this year for 2025 in anticipation of Trump coming to office. And there's a passage in there where it just sort of talks about how pro-democracy forces can oppose anti-democracy forces. So even though we were talking before about this actually is, these raids are what people voted for. I mean, like, love them or hate them, that's what they are. But
look at the way ICE is armed. They're obviously armed to go into places where they're going to face opposition, right? Look at the tactics and the way they're trained. They're obviously supposed to arrest people and surprise people and do all the things that law enforcement does that aren't very appetizing to the peaceful individual, to people, the civilian. But it's not as though ICE is suddenly turned into a aggressive law enforcement force. Look at their uniforms, look at their outfits, look at their arms and their tactics. They're doing what they do.
Yeah, Maxine Waters was very upset that they brought weapons at all. Why do they have guns? She asked. I don't know. Probably because soldiers generally do. But anyway, if we could scroll down a little bit, it's the next page, the one, and it's the bullet point that says that begins forcefully contest. These are instructions for pro-democracy forces. Forcefully contest each individual illiberal act of non-democratic actors within the bounds of democratic norms, utilizing institutional measures such as the constitutional authorities of courts and legislatures can slow or obstruct illiberal reforms. Opposition leaders may also choose to pursue more extreme institutional measures available to them, for example, impeachment processes, votes of no confidence, and recall referenda, and or deploy extra institutional tools, for example, protest strikes or boycotts. So if that sounds familiar, look, we have seen this a lot overseas, but this does sound a lot like what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, particularly. How much you want to make of that, I don't know, but it gives off an odor to me. I don't know. Does it to you, Walter? I don't know.
What? Well, obviously. Okay. I mean, are we supposed to act like we're 5 years old? When we saw over the last few years, millions of immigrants in a really intense and increasing fashion, and we knew that it was a possibility that Donald Trump might be elected. It's only putting 2 and 2 together that when he was elected, he would do something about it, right?
Right.
And it's only putting 2 and 2 together to know that there would be resistance using the tried and true tactics of, let's call it civil disobedience. That this clash should be taking place on the first spring, summer weekend of his first term is something I could have penned into my calendar the day after he was elected. We all knew this was going to happen, and we knew basically the form in which it was going to happen. If he made good on his campaign promises at all, okay? And we knew how it would be reported because we already saw it. We've had this template in front of us for ages. So what we're doing right now is we're observing the playing out of a rather predetermined match that could, because it involves violence and political passion, go in all kinds of directions. But to be shocked by it is to be shocked by the fact that the leaves are going to turn red in October.
Yeah, I just think all this is useful because it's useful to understand the framing of this conflict. It's the same thing we've been talking about for years. It's two groups that are absolutely utterly opposed to one another, and this sort of democracy playbook group they really believe, I think sincerely they believe that they are up against the forces of illiberalism, and so they have to be illiberal in return. I disagree with them, but that's what they think, and so they're heavily motivated unlike, again, 30 years ago when you would have seen some people coming together to try to figure out a way that they could dial this all down and in a way that helped everybody. Nobody is motivated right now to calm down.
Matt, all I heard from the left for the last few years was how great the FBI and the CIA were. I mean, and that the deep state is our savior, and that
we need institutionalists,
and that institutions are the bulwark of American, stability and democracy and so on. To tell you that I think the left has a morally hollow posture at this point is only to recount the facts, not to give my opinion. They have not been good on civil liberties for a long time. They were terrible during COVID. They cheerled, to me, the most thorough violation of our civil rights that I've ever seen in my life, down to almost nearly forced medication of the population by, using substances rather untested. And so suddenly they want to put back on the wreath of, I don't know, 1960s civil rights,
we're going to start seeing reruns of Inherit the Wind and everything on
holiness.
TV.
And I'm just a little bit more detached. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit more skeptical than I used to be. I grew up and I know that there are uses for this thing. And there are schedules on which these things happen, and there are ways that they're framed, and I just can't be at the barricades the way I used to be.
Oh, also, I think the character of these things has changed, and this is a good segue to get to what we're going to talk about today with the book, because we're going to talk about the funniest chapter in the book, but also the most disturbing.
Yeah.
But the last thing I'll say is, yes, they've been terrible about civil liberties, and now suddenly flipping back to being, ardent civil libertarians is very upsetting. There is, I just have to put it in there. There is some of that going the other way too, right? And that can be disorienting as well when you think that you're, that one side has gotten a religion about it, and suddenly. They start pushing in the edge of the envelope too. But this other thing though is different. It's much more overtly a political show, I think, with these pro-democracy forces I just think they're a new character in American politics. Do you know what I mean by that?
If I'm gonna pull back and give my actual sort of sports commentary on this whole thing, I'll tell you what has impressed me. There's something a little anemic about this. I mean, it's generating big imagery on TV, but it doesn't feel like the wildfire that Floyd was. Okay. Number two, I think America is weary of these kind of conflicts, weary of the press coverage, especially extremely jaded about the whole business. I also think that those who are on the Trump side feel a little more justified and a little more stalwart in their position than they used to, having just come off a presidential election. I don't think they're going to be guilted or made to doubt their desires or sentiments in the way they were after 4 years of Trump during COVID in 2020, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we're looking at a parallel situation. I don't think this is going to go all that far, frankly. There may be incidents, there may be outrages, there's certainly a lot of political talk, but as yet no real leader has arisen on the democracy side. Listen, they just don't have any speakers out there.
No, when they're rebranding Kamala D. Harris, and by the way, it looks like that page changed in January. That tells you a lot. They just
right around the ascension of a new president.
I mean, it's funny,
Right.
is what it is.
Well,
But,
he's Donald J. Trump, so she needs to be Kamala D. Harris, right?
Right. Yeah, KDH, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, so yeah, you're absolutely right. And this whole thing, it's not going to go on long. Also, it's a clear political loser for the Democratic side. So I don't know why they would try to keep it in the news cycle. It looks bad from every angle. The only thing that they can really win with is scaring people on MSNBC about martial law. That's the only note that they've been really sounding.
And these are vastly shrunken media outlets, vastly since last time. Come on, they weren't doing all that well in 2020. Now they're doing terribly. Most of the tricks. I mean, here we've sat mocking the mostly peaceful moniker over and over, and they're using it again. That is a measure of where we're at. People are wised up. And whether they're passionate about the issue or not really doesn't matter, because in any protest movement, it's getting the middle to move to you. It's sort of getting the undecideds to move to you that's important. The people who are directly affected by the issue are going to feel a certain way and be passionate. It's convincing others to either support you or not oppose you that is the secret. They have no charisma on their side. In the old days, a civil rights leader would be someone who, I don't think I made my point earlier well enough. A civil rights leader would be somebody who was directly affected by the issue at hand.
Yeah,
I'm Malcolm X. I'm Eldridge Cleaver. I'm Martin Luther King. I'm a black man in a country that discriminates against them. I'm Cesar Chavez, representing migrant workers. I myself, come from a background like that, or a union leader, or the old leftist,
or Neil Kinnock, right?
Yeah, exactly. But a movement without a face, a movement without a politician who's actually willing to go down to the peaceful protest.
Well,
it doesn't seem promising to me. It's not being personified by anyone.
No, and that is a segue to 1984, because
even George Floyd had a martyr. It had
right,
a face.
Exactly. There's no person. They haven't figured out a way to personify this thing.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is because that's not how they think about this. Anyway, well, let's just set the stage about what's similar to this phenomenon in 1984. We Walter and I kind of debated a little bit about what to focus on today, and we decided to focus on chapter 17 in the book, which is really a big turning point, and it has tremendous relevance. If you read just one chapter in this book, and you're looking for something that has direct relevance to the current day, it's chapter 17, when everybody is preparing for Hate Week, and they're all geeked up to start a huge campaign about how much everybody hates Eurasia because we're at war with Eurasia. And then there's a sentence. It just says, merely it became known with extreme suddenness and everywhere at once that Eastasia and not Eurasia was the enemy. And so suddenly Oceania is in this bizarre Twilight Zone moment where all the old messaging about being at war with Eurasia is still up. It's not a fully digital world like ours is. So
right.
Yeah.
You can't do instant stealth editing of everything.
Exactly. You can't do it by AI, right? So the stuff is still up there, but this is actually an interesting point because I have a question about that. I think it actually serves their purpose to leave the mistakes up, and get people in the habit of accepting
Well,
the
doublethink.
changes, the doublethink. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the key to being a sort of passive citizen of Oceania, or Oceania, as it's called by the guy who's reading the Audible version I'm listening to, is that you are able to hold in your mind contradictory ideas without being upset by them, and without requiring that they be reconciled. And I think it's in this chapter that you get the most explosively comic, sort of surreal vision of how that works. And just let me read this.
Mm-hmm.
So Winston is imagine he's in downtown LA, okay? And he's protesting, deportation of migrants or whatever it might be. But in this case, it's a war against East Asia. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the protest, the enemy changes. It's announced that it's changed. There was, of course, no admission that any change had taken place. Merely it became known with extreme suddenness and everywhere at once that East Asia, and not Eurasia, was the enemy. Winston was taking part in a demonstration in one of the central London squares at the moment when it happened. It was night, and the white faces and the scarlet banners were luridly floodlit. The square was packed with several thousand people, including a block of about 1,000 school children in the uniform of the spies. Well, what happens is that when they suddenly declare that it's a different enemy, they've still got the posters up of the old enemy. And so how do they reconcile this in their minds? They immediately say, those were put up by saboteurs.
Right.
And they start ripping them down. Like, how dare they lie about, who we're at war with? In other words, the black comedy of the scene is him showing this absurd and instantaneous mental switch being flipped, and how absolutely enthusiastic people are to switch it. They literally look at the same poster that they believed to be true 1 minute ago, and this minute they go, it's a lie, and let's pull it down. It must have been put there by saboteurs.
And this is it's so close to what we have now. Like, we've been sort of in awe in the last decade or so that positions that people held vocally and at length in the Bush years, they suddenly became opposed to, right? So there were all those folks who were ardent opponents of everything from the FISA Enhancements Act to the Patriot Act to to the stellar wind surveillance that Snowden uncovered, who were supporters of Julian Assange. Suddenly they flipped completely. Like there was a complete inverse where the people who were conducting this surveillance were suddenly the good guys. The FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they were the professionals. They represented institutions and norms, and they had to be preserved. And this was entirely about their attitude towards one politician, basically. Then there's an electoral change, and now Trump is going to, he's introducing this new program about, there's two things going on right now. Now we're back to being against the authorities again, and we're back for being for civil liberties. But there's also this widespread propaganda about fear of a creeping surveillance state led by Palantir. Why I should be more afraid of Palantir than DARPA and not equally afraid, I'm not sure. But that's kind of the position. And people have accepted this without complaint, haven't they?
Well, so here's a sentence also from Winston's point of view during this protest, whose object has suddenly switched. He said, The hate continued exactly as before, except that the target had been changed. The thing that impressed Winston in looking back was that the speaker had switched from one line to the other, actually in mid-sentence, not only without a pause, but without even breaking syntax. Well, once you've been through enough of those hairpin turns, enough of those boomerangs, enough of those back and forth, which, at my age, I've been through about 10 of them. And they seem to have sped up. The oscillations in the last few years and decades have sped up. You do have to pull back and go, what the hell is going on here? Is this an Orwellian situation? Or is it, politics as usual? And I must conclude that I am not reading this book without an urgent sense that it applies to what's going on right now. There were times when I read this book and it seemed to be about faraway things, the Soviet Union, totalitarianism, etc. But when it discusses how a protest switches in midstream its object, and how a society goes from one enemy to the other, but the form never changes, I have to think that's what I'm seeing around me at the moment. And this book is speaking to our immediate circumstances.
There are obviously things in this book that are references to Stalinist Russia, right? Like there's a thing, Winston ends up under arrest in this book, and there's a lengthy passage in there about how the thieves had it, the common criminals had it much better behind bars than the pollits, the political prisoners, and that is an exact representation of what happened in the Soviet Union. The regular crooks were the aristocracy behind bars, but this part I feel is much more about something that's maybe like an eternal truth about dystopias in general, that we are now feeling even more forcefully and more unnervingly than maybe even the Soviet citizens did, because the Soviet reflex was just obedience. People didn't take the news seriously. They weren't expected to believe.
We're getting that way.
Right. And we are getting that way. That's right. But there's some of us who were raised in old think, and these oscillations, as you put it, are still jarring. I wanted to mention another thing there in this same chapter, where the announcement about the switch happens, is also the chapter where Winston discovers that the main character discovers that Emmanuel Goldstein's book has been slipped into his briefcase, and he gets to read the tract written by the enemy of the state. And when he starts reading it, Walter, it's like the unvarnished truth, basically, right?
So let's set that up a little bit. We haven't talked about how many episodes we're going to devote to 1984, but I feel like we've got at least a couple left in us, because the book is thought to be about a dystopia, something in the future, etc. But more and more, really, I see it as just a book about the perennial nature of power. And yes, it's an intensification. Yes, it's an exaggeration for almost satirical purposes. But really, he wasn't talking about processes that only occur in totalitarian societies. He was talking about how politics works, how power politics works. And when he gets to this point where he's reading Goldstein's book, remember, he has volunteered. He has gone to O'Brien, who we have met earlier in the book and believe is a inner party member, part of the authoritative big brother inner circle. But Winston has volunteered to join O'Brien in rebellion. You know what I mean? It's not in the movie. This is a part of the book that's kind of left out. O'Brien poses in the middle as part of the underground, and draws Winston in and says, you know, at a certain point, I'm going to put a book in your briefcase, or one of my agents is, so that you can read about the real nature of the resistance. And so he does. And what the book says, what's it called again? The theory and practice of collectivism or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read this part, I was reading about the politics and the foreign policy of this moment. So this is supposedly from Goldstein's book. The splitting up of the world into three great superstates was an event which could be, and indeed was, foreseen before the middle of the 20th century. With the absorption of Europe by Russia and the British Empire by the United States, two of the three existing powers, Eurasia and Oceania, were already effectively in being. The third, East Asia, only emerged as a distinct unit after another decade of confused fighting. Well, right now, we're in the process, it seems, of switching from Russia being the main enemy to China being the enemy, right? Or we shuttle back. I mean, here's Orwell in 1948 saying there's going to be this game in which the three major power structures will constantly rotate in their alliances and in their enmities, and that will be used to keep the people down. And he says, in one combination or another, these three superstates are permanently at war. War, however, is no longer the desperate, annihilating struggle that it was in the early decades of the 20th century. It is a warfare of limited aims between combatants who are unable to destroy one another, have no material cause for fighting, and are not divided by any genuine ideological difference. He has described the world today. I mean, really, China is basically, you know, an organized form of capitalism, or with the socialist, you know, characteristic. Russia, you know, we're no longer fighting communism the way we were. We're just engaged in this ongoing geopolitical, you know, balancing act, which could go on forever and involves outbreaks and you know, uprushes of conflict, but never comes to anything, and keeps us forever mired in fealty to the state.
And he also outlines in the beginning of this amazing essay that you're describing that throughout history there have always been three groups: high, middle, and low. And to one degree or another, societies have always been organized that way. And why do we have continuous war now? As you say, it's not the all-out annihilating struggle of World War I or World War II. The primary aim of modern warfare, in accordance with the principles of doublethink, this aim is simultaneously recognized and not recognized by the directing brains of the inner party, is to use up the products of the machine. Ever since the end of the 19th century, the problem of what to do with the surplus of consumption goods has been latent in industrial society. This is because all these three groups their aims are irreconcilable, right? And he says, an all-around increase in wealth threatened the destruction, indeed in some case was the destruction, of a hierarchical society. So you have to destroy wealth in order to maintain, use it up in continuous warfare and struggle, in order to maintain scarcity, to make sure that wealth still confers distinction.
Exactly.
It's a fascinating theory, but it sure feels like it's a little bit true at the moment. Like there's no reason like behind this continuous argument.
Permanent war is a means for creating and maintaining more a social and economic and financial hierarchy. That's what Goldstein, the enemy, says. What else does Goldstein say? I mean, he basically suggests that we're in an era of control, which is enforced by pseudo violence. So what happens throughout 1984 is every once in a while a rocket will land and kill a bunch of people in Oceania. It's kind of in the way that we accept terrorism happening every once in a while. They just have these rockets land. And Winston's girlfriend, who's more cynical than him, and that's part of the comedy of their relationship, says, we're shooting those things ourselves. Those rockets come from us. What you would call a false flag now,
right?
And Winston says, "Oh my gosh, I'd never thought of that." He said, he says, in a way, she's more suited to revolution than I am because, she's got this kind of cunning, suspicious mind. And she says, "No, we're the ones dropping those rockets on ourselves in order to keep, everybody in fear." Orwell really would have been branded the worst conspiracy theorist of all time in our current, in our current world.
He would have a podcast for sure, and it would be, it would be funny to see what the responses were. But no, that's really the thing about the rockets is hilarious. And why are they doing that? Because you can't. In the society, you can't have complacency, you can't have relaxation, you can't have people finding, some kind of satisfaction or happiness or building a platform upon which to think about resistance, maybe. The way they put it is, a party member is expected to have no private emotions and no respites from enthusiasm. So you have to be continually consumed by the conflict. And this part, I feel like, is way more relevant to our current situation than even it was to the Soviets in 1936, when they were, constantly regaled with news stories about being surrounded by wreckers and things like that. I don't know how many Russians actually believe that, but our society really is divided into people who are absolutely consumed by political enthusiasms. Don't you think? To the point,
as the weather allows. I mean, it's hard to do it right in the middle of the winter, but now that it's summertime, let's have enthusiasm after enthusiasm. I mean, Goldstein, who's the great subversive enemy who may or may not exist in the book, and to whom all evil and all subversion is attributed, and who may or may not lead this group called the Brotherhood, that may or may not, count in the millions, or maybe it only has a few hundred partisans. We never know, and there's no way of knowing. Goldstein is a pretty smart character. I haven't found anything I disagree with in his book yet.
I know.
And his thesis is really simple. We've got three classes: the upper, the middle, and the lower, who have irreconcilable differences. The top is always going to always be trying to keep down the middle. And in any triangular relationship, you have to find one ally to do a pincer movement on the third. The top allying with the bottom against the middle is a tried and true tactic. So both foreign wars and internal conflict can be used to, as they say, burn up these surpluses and vent the energies that might lead to the middle going against the top, which has been in human history the greatest threat to the top, frankly, especially when the middle and the bottom ally themselves. See, that's the alliance that can't happen.
Exactly. And this is why, Winston's, he places so much hope in the proles, right? Because it's so clear that the one thing that numerically would completely upset the balance of everything would be an alliance of a frustrated and collapsing middle class and a potentially furious lower class, right? We saw this with Occupy Wall Street. Occupy was almost entirely like there wasn't a whole lot of proletarian energy in Occupy. There was a lot of
it was like Princeton classmates of mine were leaders of Occupy. Really,
yeah,
literally.
exactly. But it could have been because what they were talking about was stuff that was massively affecting regular people, right? So if they had figured out how to wire that thing differently, you could have had this huge uprising, and that's why everybody was so panicked about it. Similarly, I think the Trump movement, the Bernie movement, also, like the thing that everybody was most concerned with was making sure that there was never that any kind of merger between the various strands of populism in this country.
Well, right now, I think what you're seeing is Harvard plus immigrants. In other words, you're seeing the top and bottom combo against the middle, and that's probably a perennial combo that works in some way to going back to Caesar even, but what I think is interesting also is that in 1984, Goldstein may or may not exist. He's a boogeyman. We don't even know if this book that he wrote is a book that was written by the party itself as a fake radical document. You know what I'm saying?
Of course.
We're about to find out, in fact, in the book, that the opposition, the brotherhood that Goldstein supposedly leads, and supposedly he's alive, is to some degree fake. I mean, certainly O'Brien's membership in it is fake. And so that adds a whole other wrinkle, which is that sometimes the populist movement is the instrument of the inner circle. And I think people have come to suspect that about the Trump movement at times. I see people. I see people peeling off of the populist Trump movement all the time, going, "Wait a second, this thing's led by a billionaire from New York who went to private school and hangs out with all these other billionaires. Is this what it purports to be, or is this in fact the top masquerading as the middle?"
He also just jacked up, or is trying to jack up, the defense budget, which is interesting, right? Because they were talking in a very different way not long ago.
The thing that I mean, to go off the book into contemporary politics, the thing that would be the ruination of the Trump movement is if the idea caught on that it is in fact, and it almost did with Elon, that it is in fact a fake populist movement masking an elite drive to maybe, create a bigger surveillance state or something. That's the doubt that will rend that movement.
For sure. Yeah. And especially if this, they can get more, there's more to this Palantir thing, right? If that's the contractor who becomes the boogeyman, there will absolutely be claims about that, because the whole idea, or at least they told their voters, that we're trying to dismantle the deep state. We don't want this anymore. But if they're doing something that's very similar, that's going to be very demoralizing to people. But
the undoing of Trump is not going to be street protests. The undoing of Trump will be a suspicion that he's not who he says he is, and that he's acting on behalf not of deplorables at all, but of the people who want to put them all into an AI-controlled hive society. And a left person couldn't have done that because there would have been resistance.
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked about this over the summer when we were at the convention, right? Like if Trump had gone with Marco Rubio, there would have been this as the VP, as the running mate. There would have been this nervousness among his MAGA base that he's been being incorporated by the national security state and everything that I think would have been hard for him to overcome. Meanwhile, these street protests, I think they help elect Trump. 2020.
I was alive during Nixon. The only way they got rid of Nixon was, by exposing his, misdeeds. He was an incredibly popular president who was reelected in a landslide even after the Watergate scandal had sort of begun. He in middle America where I lived, good old Minnesota, cracking down. Even Kent State is remembered as some horror that destroyed, the credibility of the power structure. No, it didn't. Middle America took it in stride. I hate to tell you, but it did. That's not what brought down Nixon.
Yeah, I mean, Joe McGinnis put it very succinctly. He said Nixon is president of every place that doesn't have a bookstore, and he's remembered as this villainous character because, well, not as a villainous character, as this horrifically unpopular character because the people who write the histories all lived in places that hated Nixon. But that probably wasn't the case. I mean, I was a little too young to know, but I'm guessing that was what it was like. But this
back
chapter,
to 1984,
yeah, this chapter I just think is so fascinating because it speaks to this, whether or not there is a strategy to the clumsiness of our media today. Like, what, it was a scandal in America in 2004 when we started to learn that there weren't weapons of mass destruction. There was much whispering in the country, like, oh my God, we were lied to, right? People discussed it.
Matt, how quickly did we go from Obama, basically insulting Mitt Romney by saying, oh, you think Russia is the enemy? You want the foreign policy of the 1950s back or whatever? Russia's our friend.
Yeah, the 80s called. They want their foreign policy
back. Or the 80s called, yeah. To Putin, the same guy who was heading Russia under while Obama was there, being the arch enemy of all time. We actually have been through exactly this, Eurasia is our friend, Eurasia is our enemy thing in just a few years.
We've been through it repeatedly. We've been through it so much now that people don't blink at it. We immediately forget things that are reported and are, discovered to not be true, right? Or if we're asked to square a circle somehow, right? Like, the changing definition of vaccine, went from being something that confers immunity to something that promotes an immune response, which is a pretty big difference, right? We just, in our minds now, we've gone through this cycle so many different times that people they don't even, they're I think even the mental ability or the instinct to even examine whether or not things need to be true for longer than a day or two, I think is vanishing.
Okay, if you take the template of 1984, in which an inner circle, an elite, manipulates foreign wars, internal conflict, uses tools of surveillance, censorship, the rewriting of history to maintain its control. Its ideological pretensions are all fake. In other words, it's not really serving whatever utopian ends it pretended to. In 1984, there really aren't sides. Ideology is a transparent instrument of power, and power is all that matters. Even the party loyalists are going to be disappeared ultimately because power itself will always put its agenda over personalities, even over loyal soldiers. If you imagine that might describe our current society, tell me where it's wrong. I can't find that it's wrong. In other words, if you want to tell me, no, we're actually subject to really sincere ideological differences about this and about that, and this is cynical and dystopian and an exaggeration and does not apply, and this is conspiracy thinking, I have an Orwellian comeback for every case you might make. The thing that's terrifying about the book, and it might be the most terrifying book ever written, I forgot two things about it. It's scary, and scary beyond belief, because it almost offers no hope, no way out. It's a description of an absolutely perfect system of control that destroys every character. But it's also funny because it shows human nature at its most absurd. It shows that we are willing to suspend reason, instinct, love, loyalty, everything, just to survive another day.
Another few moments, actually.
Get another cigarette, have another piece of chocolate.
Yeah. No,
not get fired from our job.
It's a very dark book about people in general. I think you're right to say that it's not strictly a book about dystopia, because there's a lot of eternal themes in this book. We're all dying as soon as we're born, and it is ultimately a story about this sort of whittling away of hope and everything. The cravenness of people and their willingness to dime each other out for nothing, their lack of conviction. These are all themes that we've seen in literature before. It's amplified in this book in this kind of Kubrickian horror story. It's like a nightmarish roller coaster, and that takes you through all the different levels of paranoia and self-doubt and false hope and everything, and accelerates.
And even its hero is kind of awful. I made fun of the introduction, the trigger warning introduction, in which kind of woke writer said, "Oh, I usually don't read books about misogynists and so on." Well,
oh, by the way, we made the newspapers because of that. Can we see that?
Yeah, we made the Daily Mail, at least, if you call that a newspaper. And but Winston isn't supposed to be a hero. And in fact, in the chapter before the one we just read, he thinks back to when he was a child before the revolution, or in the early days of the revolution, I guess. And he talks about when at home he was living with his mother and his little sister, and they were all starving. And his sister was actually starving to death, his little sister. She looked like a monkey, he said. Malnourishment had rendered her features simian, he says. And one day they get a 2-ounce ration of chocolate at the house that he wants all of. And he actually steals the 1/3 of the piece of chocolate that the mother gives to the sister from the starving sister. Then one day he comes home and his sister and his mom have disappeared. He wonders at times about how the proles are still loyal to one another. And he tells his girlfriend during one of their assignations, we're not human anymore. The proles are still human, but we're not.
Yeah.
There is no admiring Winston Smith except for his intentions.
And his unwillingness to, not his unwillingness.
His inability.
The fact that he doesn't lie. Yeah.
Yeah, his inability. But he literally stole candy from his starving sister as a child.
Yeah, his only positive quality is that he's basically he's constitutionally incapable of lying to himself well enough to be to live, right?
But he's also vicious, and there are these strange black comedy, almost horror movie details in the book. He talks about how one day he's walking along and he sees a human hand lying, a severed human hand lying on the sidewalk, and he picks it up and throws it in the ditch. You know, as we said, the first line or the first page of his diary is about going to a propaganda movie and seeing an arm blown sky high into the movie, in the movie, while everybody cheers and he cheers with them. You know, this is a brutalized, dehumanized society. And when O'Brien fake recruits him for the Brotherhood, O'Brien says, well, I need to know what you'll be willing to do in order to further the Brotherhood's aims. Will you be willing to kill? And he says, oh, of course. He said, you know, will you be willing to deal dangerous drugs? Yes, of course. Would you be willing to throw acid into the face of a child if it were necessary to promote the Brotherhood? And Winston says yes. The only question, the only, you know, dare he says no to is, will you break up with your girlfriend? No.
Right.
I still want to have sex.
Yeah. And that's where they get him, by the way. Because that's still that's the little kernel of him that's not quite dead yet.
Right.
So they're able to exploit that. And it's funny throughout the book, Orwell downplays these other moral horrors, right? Like killing children, bombing, atomic, you know, he casually mentions nuclear bombs and stuff like that. But he's intensely concerned with this question of belief and acceptance of lies and truth and that sort of thing. In this chapter, there's a moment where this is the next moment there was a tremendous commotion. The banners and posters with which the square had been decorated for Hate Week were all wrong. Quite half of them had the wrong faces on them. And then he says, it was sabotage. The agents of Goldstein had been at work. So even though people 2 seconds ago were looking at something they know was put up by the party, they were conditioned to immediately believe that it was wreckers who did it, even without being told to think that. And you know, that makes them, I think, you know, it's sort of implied that makes them worse people than Winston,
Right.
Which isn't true, I don't think.
Right.
It just happens to be that's the one thing that he's not able to do. But boy, are we like that society. Like what's incredible about this book is how it's just this world of one-note thinkers who just, you know, move around, and wherever Goldstein is, they hate that. And with whomever we're at war with, they hate them. And again, it just feels a lot like this moment.
And whoever is pointed at as a saboteur or a, you know, a thought criminal, we hate them. But I'm going to leave our audience with a eureka that I had, which I'll explain in our next broadcast. It was in chapter 17 that I suddenly had a unified field theory of our current politics. And it goes something like this. In 1984, the enemy is a ghost. Goldstein. Is he alive? Is he dead? Anything can be attributed to him. Deep conspiracy, almost omniscient cunning, etc. But he works as an enemy of the totalitarian state, and he functions as an object of hate because he's invisible. We are living in an obverse situation in which our president has almost volunteered to play the role of Goldstein. And if you want to understand Trump, and if you want to understand his power, I think you have to understand the reverse Goldstein move that he has played and continues to play. By making himself an object of hate, Donald Trump has taken away the hate tool from the enemy. The reason that he doesn't go a week without outraging you, the reason that he doesn't go a week without saying some ridiculous thing that gets you is because in 1984, the party owns Goldstein. They can use him for anything they want to, and they can induce hate of him on any schedule they wish. In 2025 in America, we have a Goldstein who owns himself and who is using the ability to create outrage to steal that weapon from his enemy. And people will, come at me forever for saying this, but it's one of the most brilliant political moves I've seen in my life, to volunteer to be the scapegoat. So instead of, in fascist Germany, the Jews they're scheming, they're out there, they're secretly meeting in their temples or whatever, or, in Soviet Russia, the forces of reaction are down there. Trump or someone around him had the absolutely brilliant realization that if you're willing to be the scapegoat, if you're willing to incarnate the enemy and be hated constantly, you take that weapon away from your enemy and you schedule it and you have it go off and you manipulate it and you use the power of hatred and disgust on your own terms. And I think that's what he's done. And I think that's what the Trump revolution, so to speak, is all about. That insight or that new maneuver. I'll be Goldstein so they can't make me Goldstein.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And that's what it's an outgrowth of his I'll be the heel
exactly
in wrestling. And I've talked to pro wrestlers about this since, the whole idea is to get the audience hooting and hollering against you. But
yes.
Once you get into the match and the lead up to it, there suddenly becomes a contest of who's less attractive to the audience and who can win over whom and everything. And the attention, part of the game is being able to drum up the most attention. And he's been very good at that. And he's also been good at using that to run against something less popular even than them himself. Like if you ran posters Emmanuel Goldstein for president in America in 2023, it would have gotten a lot of votes just by that. You know what I'm saying?
The thing that doesn't happen in 1984 and which you realize can't happen if the society is to go on is for Goldstein to show up.
Of course.
Imagine if Goldstein shows up in downtown London on Airstrip 1, formerly known as England, and the Brotherhood all claps, and you see that he's just a person, and he cracks a lot of bad jokes, and he's dressed funny, and he's got weird hair. Suddenly, the power of the octopus lurking underneath everything, the scapegoat, the conspiracy leader, is personified, and Goldstein has the power that formerly belonged to his enemies.
Yeah, and in an opposite way, Stalin understood this, which is why he never blamed a real conspiracy for anything. He always picked out a fictional, a block. The right Trotskyist bandits, because then there was nothing to appear and argue for itself.
And that's why I think Trump's enemies are constantly looking for a ghostly mastermind who isn't him to get us mad at. Like they tried to have it be Putin. Oh, he's the secret mastermind, or whoever, Elon Musk, just until a few weeks ago or a week ago, Peter Thiel or whatever, because Trump, by in a way owning the character of Goldstein, can now schedule the outrage. He can produce it himself. They don't own the agenda. They don't have the clock anymore. He has the clock.
Yeah, it's wild. It's certainly couldn't have predicted that would have happened in America, but it is. And how conscious of a political strategy it is I'm not sure.
I know it's conscious.
By now it is for sure.
My dad and my father, who is kind of a moderate Republican, who moderate Republican means you vote for Democrats, but you, in theory, would like to vote for Republican. They just never come along. That was how my dad was. And with Trump, he was like, why does this guy lead with his chin? He always said that to me. Why does he lead with his chin? Why, he gets a good week or 2 weeks, his polls are going up, and then he comes out and does something fucking crazy or ridiculous or outrageous. Well, after now, 12 years of that, you realize, yeah, it's got to be a program, because he is constantly volunteering to take the outrage that the others would like to stir up on their schedule and in their way.
Yep. And it's an inverse of the book too, but the book sure describes a lot about this moment, just with the main character, the missing villain present. So anyway,
one last thing. So, the comments are going crazy about Palantir. You're not going to talk about Palantir. First of all, we did talk about Palantir a little bit. Second of all, we will. But I think there'll be an occasion with 1984 as we get toward the end to talk about that very thing. And I can't wait to do it.
Yeah, I'm a little confused about the Palantir thing, because we've had private contractors who've sought to do this exact thing for 20 years now. I mean, I would advise people to go back and look up a thing called total information awareness that was first unveiled.
Palantir is the new Goldstein.
Right.
You're absolutely right. Oh, we haven't had, private companies trying to influence or surveil or censor or, manipulate and information. Oh my God, it's a huge growth industry. There's about 20 companies you can invest in right now that do just that. And
on the information side, the privateness is actually what makes the censorship work, for instance. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So, but I can't wait to get to Palantir. But Palantir's getting a little Goldstein-ish, because there are other companies that have done and do that, which they are being accused of.
Yep, absolutely. Anyway, thanks everybody. Definitely check out chapter 17 if you haven't, and we will see you again on later this week, when undoubtedly more will have happened. Walter, thanks a lot. Thanks everybody for hanging out, and we'll see you again soon.